Welcome to La Casa de NCU podcast. My name is Dr. Maria Rodriguez, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Geovanni Vazquez, and we are so honored to have a guest today, Iohann Rashi Vega. So please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. So, okay, let's start with saying that I am born and raised in Mexico City. And it is a journey that in 1999 particularly became a transition leaving Mexico, knowing that I needed to do that in order to pursue all the professional goals that I had in mind. So I lived since 1999 for 12 years in Puerto Rico. And during that time, among multiple things, but my main work was working with the public radio station at the University of Puerto Rico in Rio Piedras, Radio Universidad. And I did pretty much everything in there, starting from assisting with production and then becoming a host for some shows, producer. Actually, I was anchor for the news during a couple of years. So I did all different type of work at Radio Universidad, pretty much covering all the different aspects. And that also allowed me to learn a lot, learn deeply about all the situations in the social life and the cultural environment in Puerto Rico. At some point in 2011, because of the different situations happening with socio-economical aspects in Puerto Rico, and seeing how that became a repetition of a story that I lived myself in Mexico City in '83, I saw that living there was no longer going to be viable. So I made the decision of leaving Puerto Rico and then moving into the continental United States. And ever since, I've been living in Massachusetts, particularly in the city of Holyoke, where currently I am working as the Director of Media Engagement and Programming for Holyoke Media, which is a community public television and media outlet in the city of Holyoke in Massachusetts. And also I am the Director of Media Lab, which is an educational program, part of the New England Public Media, which is the public television and radio in the region of Western Massachusetts. And this program is focused on working on educating and providing opportunities for youth in underrepresented communities to learn about how to create media content. So they get training on everything related to radio, television, digital media, podcasting, and with this possible opportunities for them to become the next generation of media professionals in the region of Western Massachusetts.
That's great. Can you tell us a little bit about how was the transition and adapting both as an individual and as a professional? Because you kind of like go from Mexico to Puerto Rico to the U.S. So
it was a process.
Mm-hmm.
You have to learn to unlearn and learn again. When I went to Puerto Rico, I was under this assumption, and a wrongful assumption, that it was going to be an easy transition, and it was not, because and I knew it. I knew nothing about the actual situation of what is to live in Puerto Rico. This cultural syncretism, the situation that Puerto Rico has as still a colony, possibly the last colony in the world, and how complicated this situation is. And when you are outside of this environment, you don't know, you don't even begin to imagine how complicated this situation is. So for me, it took a couple of years to begin to understand. And the first thing that I learned is that I can no longer continue thinking as a Mexican. If I want to be in Puerto Rico and integrate as a Puerto Rican, to keep thinking the way I used to, I had to learn and live the same way Puerto Rican people does on the island. And that was such an eye-opener, because then I began to understand the complex situation, and at the same time, the fascinating and unique situation that the Puerto Rican people live, having this multiple influx of cultural influences and heritage, and at the same time, its own identity. So I took as a mission to learn the most that I could from it, so that way, without giving away or giving up on my own identity as a Mexican, but understanding and embracing what it means to be Puerto Rican. And through my work in Radio Universidad, it was something that I was able to always help to promote and to amplify through the different cultural activities and the cultural scene happening, getting involved into events, into activities, and getting to know more every single time that I got the opportunity to learn something more about the history, the culture, the struggle, but as well the traditions and celebrations and how beautiful Puerto Rican people live life despite its situation. It became a new way to know how to live life. And that was exactly why, when the decision of leaving Puerto Rico in order to continue being functional, it was so hard. Actually, I have to say, it pained me exactly the same as the moment when I left Mexico, knowing that I was leaving my country and the life that I lived for the years that I lived over there. I felt exactly the same way when I left Puerto Rico, because I was going through the same process again. I left that I was living my life, but at the same time knowing that everything that I learned and that Puerto Rico gave me was going to make me a strong and more aware person to continue representing not only my identity as Mexican, but also someone who could always advocate for the Puerto Rican people and culture. Now that I am here in the continental United States, particularly in Massachusetts, where the Puerto Rican representation is so high, possibly one of the highest in the whole country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's so interesting and fascinating how we had to go through different things just to survive and adapt to a new environment. And it's so interesting that you decided to pause kind of like your identity and borrow or tomar prestada the identity of being in a different country, being a Puerto Rican, just for the sake of like, yeah, I want to do the best within my abilities here and I want to learn. And it gives you, I don't know, a new sense of appreciation that maybe somebody that is from the place takes for granted, because yeah, I know El Morro, I know, all the traditions, but to you it's like, oh, this is great. You guys, celebrate all these things. So that's fascinating. So also it was really interesting that you went through that process again when you left the island to move to the US. Do you feel that, and it's not like putting you in the spot of comparing Puerto Rico versus United States, but was it easier the transition to move from Puerto Rico to the US or from Mexico to Puerto Rico?
It was similar to the same process to learning about Puerto Rico and then being here, because I had to learn about, yes, house life, particularly in Western Massachusetts, which is a very unique and peculiar lifestyle and mindset. But also another thing that became complicated, and still today, I'm still learning about, is how different is the Puerto Rican diaspora in Western Massachusetts compared to the people in Puerto Rico. And I should have known better because myself being a migrant from Mexico City into the United States culture, knowing that Chicano people and people who has first, second generation Mexican American, they have a totally different mindset and a totally different experience and cultural background. It was a cultural shock for me to see how different many things about the Puerto Rican culture are in Western Massachusetts compared to what I experienced living 12 years in Puerto Rico. So it was once again that process of unlearning and relearn again about everything that has to do with the Puerto Rican representation in this region. And at the same time, keeping my own identity as a Mexican, being in this case, I mean, it was similar in Puerto Rico, but it feels even more larger, that self-awareness of being the minority, the actual minority, being as a Mexican in the middle of Western Massachusetts, where I've been fortunate to know and to connect with several Mexican folk, but we are a really minimal community compared to the representation that we have here, saying Puerto Rican, Dominican Republic, Colombia, and other countries in Latin America. So it was a process of going through this whole experience once again. But I have to say, thanks to the experience of being in Puerto Rico first, it was not something that I struggled with. Actually, I was thirsty of learning the most that I could, and still today I do. Because for me, it's so important to understand who is the people I am among, and how do I connect with the representation that is in here, so that way I can advocate, I can appreciate, recognize, honor, and support, especially when the work that I'm doing has to do a lot of amplifying the voices and representation of people particularly from Puerto Rico and other Latin American communities that are struggling. And through language, culture, representation, and amplifying those voices and stories, I feel that I have a responsibility of learning the most that I can about every single representation that is present in this region, knowing that by doing that, I am not giving away my own identity as a Mexican. If anything, it's just to appreciate more who I am, but at the same time knowing that I am just one small speck in this huge universe that we are here in this beautiful community that we live in general in the United States.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and you almost kind of like answered my question, but I'm gonna ask it anyways. And sorry if I'm putting you in the spot, but to you, what does it mean to be Hispanic in Western Mass? And I know that you kind of like went through the whole process of struggling and all that, but you know, to you, what does it entail to be a Hispanic?
Being Hispanic, little by little, I have learned that it is a responsibility. And maybe some people may not think it should be like that. Maybe it's not that much. But because of the work that I do, I think I have the responsibility of representing who I am culturally, because I have the opportunity, and I have to admit, the privilege of being in circles that not every single person who is Hispanic or Latino, Latina, Latinx could have that access. So because of that, I think I need to make sure that I represent to its best, and not only as Mexican, but as someone who belongs to the whole family of the Latino, Latinx community. Because if I am able, through my privilege, to pave the way to allow, especially for youth, to get access to these circles and this environment and these opportunities to thrive, to grow, to flourish as professionals, I think is something I must do, because I've been so privileged and so fortunate to get the opportunities. And yes, it comes with hard work, but at the same time, I always appreciated that I got opportunity and the access to be where I am today. That I think is my responsibility to make sure that I continue opening those opportunities for people and for the next generation to be able to get that same access that I had, so they can thrive, they can grow, they can be successful, and they can feel able to do whatever they can, despite the differences and despite the situations that we are struggling with you are not from here, which is to me something that it should not happen, but unfortunately it does, and it's something that we need to know how to navigate, but at the same time to be able to enjoy and to be fully capable of not being affected by it, so we can be our best version of ourselves in whatever capacity we are.
Yeah, no, but that's crucial. Understanding the position, the privileged position that we have, regardless if it's gender, educational level, how we look. There's a lot of things that puts us in a privileged position. But still, I really and I agree with you in terms of like the responsibility that we have. How about if we talk a little bit about radioplasma? That's something that really fascinates me a lot because of how passionate you are about that project and how much you have done with that platform.
So radioplasma, it was a consequence of needing to do something as soon as I came into Massachusetts. Because of the experience I had working at Radio Universidad, the public media, public radio in Puerto Rico, the first thing that I wanted to do is to find a way to continue doing that work at public radio in the region. At that time, that was not something that I saw viable. And I immediately saw there was going to be a lot of barriers. So I didn't even consider it as a possibility, because based on my experience working on public media and seeing how the network in the whole country works, I immediately saw that is something I'm never, at that time I said, I'm never going to be able to work in. So what it will be the next thing to do to maybe think on something that after public media comes, which is community media. So I got the opportunity and once again, the privilege of being involved in a nonprofit organization, the Gandara Center, that allowed me the opportunity to learn about how much of their work is impacting the communities, particularly the Puerto Rican community, but also in general, Latin America and underrepresented communities. And once I got into a specific program that was a youth center in the city of Holyoke, I started to think about how to create something that could relate to public media, but thinking more about community, grassroots based. So that's how Radioplasma came to be. It was inspired on the idea of creating a media outlet that could be presented as a format of a podcast initially, telling stories about people, real people. Stories of people that you otherwise will never know about. People in the community, people who are doing the hard work, and at the same time thinking about how this could be a way to represent not only culture, but also language. So that way it became a place where you could hear stories both in English and Spanish. Because I realized the local media outlets, despite the fact we have one of the largest Spanish-speaking communities in the country, they do not nurture or take care of providing content in Spanish. So I did it. That was part of what Radio Plasma started, to amplify voices of people, real people, in multicultural representation, and making sure that we could both use English and Spanish with no limitations of it at all. At the same time, I wanted Radio Plasma to become a way to teach the youth that I was working with at the Gandara Youth Development Center to learn how to do this work, so they could be the ones making those interviews, asking those questions, to the point that we got to interview candidates for local government, and I got students to be involved in those conversations, for them to ask deep, serious, challenging questions to those candidates, for them to know and understand you cannot cheat, you cannot trick youth minds about the ways you are trying to gain your position as an elected official or as a politician. I mean, if you are truth about your values, those will be seen. But if you're not, my youth will see through you and ask you and put you on the spot about those things that they don't feel they're right about you. So I thought Radio Plasma could become a really powerful tool, not only to amplifying stories, but also to become a model to teach our youth on how their power is in their hands about creating content and asking and holding people accountable about the decisions that are being made that affect them. Just because they cannot vote doesn't mean that they cannot question and put elected officials on the spot about the things they are doing or not doing for their own benefit or their own flourishment. So that has been the initial point of Radio Plasma to exist. And at the same time, as it kept growing and getting acceptance of the audiences, it also became a place to showcase a lot of artistic expression. So that way we could showcase local artists in all different disciplines and activities, everything that can connect the community into enjoying what is available in our own region here in Western Massachusetts, to be something that we can enjoy. And even if you have no access to those events because of transportation, because of responsibilities or needs to take care at home, well, you cannot attend an event. I'm going to bring it to you so you can enjoy a little bit of that. So it's all about access. It's all about bringing community together, utilizing the resources that are available today through the web, through multiple media outlets that are not only the legacy ones as newspapers, radio, television, but the digital realm that, particularly now with the pandemic, has shown to be the most important and possibly right now the main way for people to connect and get information and access to activities, engagement, and everything that they need to know about right in the moment.
Yeah, no, that's a great initiative, and I really appreciate all the effort that you have done, because you have a really extensive catalog. I think that there's close to 200 episodes. I mean, it's like plus the other series like Racismo is Real and Know Your Candidates and all that. So the next question might be a little bit controversial, but I really want to have your take on it. Why do you feel that other medias or other platforms don't feel comfortable creating content in Spanish?
Everything comes down to money. Everything comes down to control. I remember when in 2016, after the election of President 45, changed the whole perspective of things, and the division became more obvious than ever. And it was really interesting to see how some people in the media, and this happened through a conference that happened in Holyoke High School. But it was the Centro for Puerto Rican Studies that held their conference in Holyoke. And there was a particular session about media, and there were representation from different media outlets, including mainstream outlets like Telemundo. And actually, I put them on the spot because they were always saying that, no, we are working for our community. It's like, no, you're not. You are not. And you are actually part of the problem. Because as long as you continue glorifying through your programming that narcos, that the drug lords are the heroes of the community that everybody should praise and follow and know about, you are part of the problem. You are not helping the Latino community to thrive and to become successful through real goals. Glorifying narcos is not the way to do it. You are worse than Fox News or other outlets that were perpetuating the racism and division in our society in the United States. So I think sometimes, most of the times, mainstream media, even in the Latino media, are the main problem because they continue perpetrating this constant amplifying stories that the only purpose is to infuse fear, to infuse division, to infuse the perception of many of the Latinx people in the United States that you are low class, you are in that situation that you are never going to be out of it, and you should not get out of it because you are designed to be always the low class that is going to work for the rich people, for the white men, for the classes with privilege. So whatever you get on that, be grateful that you are getting that opportunity. It's like, that is a narrative that institutions like Telemundo and Univision are presenting to its people. And I was not going to accept that. And I held them accountable for it. Like, I don't believe you. I don't trust you. And I despise your work because you are just doing it for the money, as any other mainstream media does. So, not because anyone who identifies and presents themselves as Latino, Latina, Latinx means that they are aligned in the same way for really taking care of our community. We need to be really critical and really deep about questioning what exactly is that you are telling me or sharing with me? How much do I get out of it that is going to be beneficial for me? Because unfortunately, money and profit is what dictates the narrative in all communities. And unfortunately, even among our people, our Latinx people, there's a lot of them who have been seduced by that. So they will say and do anything in order to get those checks, not caring how much that impacts or affects negatively our communities. And that's what I am trying to make sure that through my work, through Holyoke Media, New England Public Media, and my own outlet as Radio Plasma, I can make sure that people see and understand this is the situation of what's going on. And I am willing to question even someone who is Latino, Latina, Latinx, because if I think or I perceive they are not being helpful to our community, you are part of the problem. And that's something that I want for our youth to learn, how to be critical thinkers and not to be afraid to ask the hard questions and to put people on the spot if needed, because that's the only way we can make sure that we hold people in power accountable.
So with that series, the one that is called racismo is real. Is that something related to that whole concept, or?
Yeah, so racismo is real it's a complicated and challenging series. Actually, it's been hard to keep it up, but I think now in a different perspective of things is something that can continue. The idea of racism is real came through the different experiences that different communities, different people in the community in Holyoke were experiencing when white supremacy and the entitlement of some people of saying and doing things that are just wrong. And I understand that their lack of understanding of what the First Amendment is. Yes, you can say whatever you want, whatever is on your mind, but they do not understand that even if you have the right to say whatever you want, there are consequences to what you say, especially if they go to the extent of the things that have been said and done. So, First Amendment is not an excuse to be racist. And I wanted through that series to make sure that people understand that racism has multiple layers and multiple situations, and it comes from different places, including the people that most of the times are victim of racism. This is not a way to justify or say or even acknowledge that reverse racism exists, because it doesn't. But racism, unfortunately, because it's something that is systemic, has been taught to communities through generations. So being that the only thing that some people know, they pass it on onto their next generation in their own communities. Therefore, and I've seen it. Living in Puerto Rico, I've seen how racism impacts locally, internally, in their own community, ways of acting and seeing things that should not be accepted. So there is a long process and a lot of work to do, because this has been something that has been prevalent for so many decades in a systemic way that, of course, is so embedded in our culture and our mindset that it's really hard to get out of it. So racism is real became an opportunity to start talking about those things and make us aware of, yes, there are things that are wrong about white supremacy and what many white people do, but also we need to see and understand how some of our own actions as Latinx are also part of that same problem, and how we should learn to unlearn so we can get better in that way. So this, I'm pretty sure, is a series that possibly is going to be a never-ending one, because we can always continue talking more about and finding out how to be better in our way of interacting with people, how to react or not to react to racist actions, and how to create a culture of tolerance, acceptance, and understanding, even to understand people who are blatant racists, because maybe that's, in most cases, that's the only thing they know. To some point, it's not even their own fault. So, you see, it's a complicated process that is not something that we can address in a 1, 2, 3 episodes of conversations, something that it could take years, possibly generations. But if this can help to start that process, I am more than willing to put all the possible efforts to make sure that I can have those conversations with people and that others can learn how to continue those conversations so we can continue growing as a society.
Yeah, and those conversations are so important, because I agree with you. Sometimes the whole motive behind those actions or those statements are based on something that they have been repeating, for generations, and they find themselves in a position where, if I don't do this, I'm going against, who I am as a person, or who my family is. So I should be doing this because this is the right way to behave. But also um, understanding the meaning behind those statements. And I feel that a lot of racism comes out of a result of fear or confusion, or not understanding, what is different about that person, and also not taking the time to just, teach me about your culture, or teach me about yourself, as opposed to just reacting and putting on this wall, and I'm going to defend myself against something that I don't, understand, as opposed to, let me understand. Maybe, I'll become a better person once I get more information. But yeah, communication is a huge factor, and why that issue has not been resolved. And hopefully, again, platforms like yours are so important, because at least they provide that space to talk about those topics, and to understand, as you said, if the fact that you have the right to say something doesn't make it okay. So, let's think about the reaction, or the cause that you're, you know, um, creating with that statement, or with those actions. So yeah.
Having conversations,
Yeah.
particularly about racism, are hard conversations, and not everybody is comfortable or eager to have them, but those are important and they must happen. I guess the one of the most important things to always keep in mind whenever these conversations are to take place is to always be open to learn, and coming from a place of understanding. The positions that people may have are based on their own personal experiences. And when sometimes, as an oppressed community, we talk about the struggle, we need to understand that sometimes the other side is also struggling, is struggling with ignorance, which is a huge monster. And they have been consumed for generations about it. So they know nothing better. So we need to be a little bit compassionate about that, and be able to at least listen. By listening, we can get to see more than just the first perception that becomes a reaction of, oh, what you're saying or what you're doing is wrong. Yes, it is. But where does that come from? How can we help you see beyond that perception that you have, that no one took the time or told you it's not just that? Because maybe by taking that additional minute of listening and understanding and informing and educating someone about why, not only telling them you are wrong, but to explain them why you are being perceived as being wrong. So you can see it's not your fault. You have been taught that. That can go so long away. That can make such a difference. And we can get a better understanding. Maybe not to agree entirely. That would be amazing, right? But at least to have a better understanding that we can coexist. And seeing that, well, yeah, I've been always told these things are this particular way, but I am beginning to see that not necessarily. And the same from the other side. That is the part that I think is our responsibility, to begin or to continue that effort of educating our communities and the communities that are oppressing to us. Let's talk. Let's listen to each other. let's really try to be intentional about finding the roots of a problem and for a moment stop being reactionary to them. And maybe we can get to a different place from it.
I'm just thinking as you're talking, it's all about building bridges, not building walls. You know, how can we find a place to listen to each other? And it's so hard sometimes to hear the other side because it just can fill us with rage to hear the narratives. But it's so important, as you say, we can't go anywhere if we don't first listen to understand where they're coming from. So I can see the vocation you have here. You fill the need in the community and you create a sense of community, which is amazing, you know, what you've done with Radio Plasma. And I'm interested in learning what the future it will be for Radio Plasma. If you have any ideas of where you're going with Radio Plasma, where maybe 5-10 years from now you think you'll be.
So it's been, especially during the pandemic, it's been challenging to continue doing it in the way it was before the pandemic, because I actually felt it was insensitive to try to keep up with conversations and things the way it was without acknowledging and being mindful about the situation we were going through, the pandemic. So it actually was almost a whole year of hiatus of Radio Plasma, because then I focused my whole work on making sure that I was providing through Holyoke Media, particularly information to the public, because there was no information at all, especially local. And most important, it was there minimal information. There was nothing offered to the public in Spanish. So that became my work for 2 years, to create a new summary of everything that could be important for the people to know about what was going on with the pandemic, from important updates, but then to start thinking about other conversations to have about wellness, about self-care, about the consequences of being isolated in quarantine, and how this affects work, life, social life, family life. I thought that was more a priority to take care of through the work that I do with Holyoke Media particularly. So Radio Plasma in a way became part of that. Now that things are a little bit more in a situation similar to what we were experiencing in 2019, it's beginning to come back into expanding and showcasing cultural representation, most of it. But I know it's going to continue, because even through the work that Holyoke Media has been, and I have to say, Holyoke Media has been always supportive of everything that I stand for in regards of communicating and engaging with the public. But I know that even that institutions have specific parameters that you have to meet. And there are things that you cannot do. You should not do. But as an independent creator of content through Radio Plasma, then I have, and following always a really serious code of ethics. But if I need to raise my voice and if I need to put out really hard, difficult, uncomfortable conversations, and even putting on the spotlight institutions, people, and public figures, including politicians and elected officials, I feel it's my responsibility to do that. Because it's not for just putting someone on the spotlight. It's because whatever they are doing is impacting our communities. So I think Radio Plasma is always going to be there to amplify those stories and to keep talking and to keep advocating for the representation of the people who do not have presence, visibility, or representation in mainstream media. So that way, there is a space where we can have those conversations and ask those difficult, hard questions to the people who need to hear them, and to hold them accountable if they continue evading, answering, or acting upon what they are supposed to be doing as elected officials.
And if people want to find you, it's radioplasma.com. So our
Yes.
listeners can check out all the great work you're doing.
The website is radioplasma.com, and also there is presence on Facebook and Instagram. And like I said, during this past years of the pandemic, the content has been minimal compared to what it was before. But little by little is coming back with a more intense representation of cultural awareness, cultural representation, language. So you can see sometimes a conversation about what is happening in our social environment. Of course, now that we are in an election year, a little bit of the conversations that will start pop up about maybe those questions on the ballot and the positions that some candidates are having about situations like, for example, how people still see something really wrong to provide driving licenses to undocumented immigrants when that is a safety issue more than a political. I mean, that doesn't affect the federal law about identifying yourself as someone who is living in the United States, whether you are documented or not. But it's the opportunity for people to have a chance to actually thrive and pursue those goals of becoming someone who can be either a permanent resident or a United States citizen, for instance. That's the goal, right? That's what that concept of American dream has been sold to all of us for generations. So let's work on that. And if that means for us to have conversations about how we are as Latinx community, not being efficient on understanding each other or embracing each other or supporting each other. Yeah, let's talk about it as well. Because we have a lot of ropa sucia que atender, a lot of issues to take care of in our own yard. And those are also uncomfortable conversations to have, and we need to have them. So it's all about having a space where we can do that in a civilized and a really respectful way, where we can get something not just to offload our emotions and perceptions of things, but to actually try to get something constructive that can allow the opportunity to make a change, to inspire change. So that way we can understand each other better and to show whoever is still on the fence about us as Latinx that, yeah, we have issues, but we have such a strong potential and such amazing drive and power that we are essential and important for the United States to become a successful country and community with all the richness that we bring together. Because it's not being different. It's just being part of this whole amazing, beautiful color palette of cultures and influences and language, music, and ideas and ways to celebrate and live life. So anything that can help that to happen, I'm down for it.
Well, thank you so much for creating this space for the community. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, for your time today. I think you will certainly have some more listeners. I know I will be listening, even though I'm not currently in Massachusetts. I am just inspired by your passion and your advocacy. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria and Gio, for this opportunity of talking to you today and your audience. And this just gives me more reason to know that we are all together, despite the differences of time zone, because we are in different places in the country, but we are all here for similar reasons. And that is more than enough to work together and to support each other.